So this is the build video for my latest kit. It doesn't really have a name yet. I guess I'll maybe call it the Crackler or the Squeaker, but it's kind of it's based around the same circuit that was used in the Crackle box, which is an early 70s um, kind of a circuit bending musical instrument. I have an article on the circuit which I'll link in, which I wrote up for Hackaday. But it's a very old op amp. I don't actually think you can buy this op amp like new anymore, but I have a bunch of them from surplus. And it has no internal frequency compensation, so it's very prone to oscillation, so it does all kind of weird things. And the circuit itself is kind of circuit design as art rather than engineering, and there's some quite odd things going on. But basically, it's very prone to oscillation, and it will make lots of cool noises. So I just discovered it makes this kind of strange pulsing if I touch these two. But basically, depending on which pads you touch, it will squeak and crackle in a bunch of different ways. So yeah, kind of strange, squeaky, untuned radio kind of noise. So this is on my shop in both an assembled and kit form, and this is just going to be my guide on how to put together the kit. So when you get it, you'll find all of these parts in the kit, and there's also like a build guide in there as well, so you can identify all the parts if you prefer, like reading in your own time as you build it rather than watching this video. But this video we're gonna kind of go through and build it. So I would tend to put in the op amp first, which is this little guy. I did a build with a bunch of kids, and they called this the octopus. So, but anyway, so the main thing is to make sure there's a little tab on the op amp, and make sure it's aligned to this little box at the top of the circle here. So that's the marker, and I tend to just try and get the top pin in first, and then kind of ease in the other pins around it. Can be a little bit awkward to get in. Very important to make sure you get it in the right way around, as you'll never be able to get it out. Once you've soldered it in, you'll have to cut the legs off. And these kind of can op amps are very awkward to remove. Oops, and there you go, I've done it wrong. So that's yeah, the pitfalls. So yeah, make sure you get it lined up right. Okay, so this time it's lined up right. So there we go. The pin at the top is pointing towards the marker on the board. Push it down a little bit so it's just sitting comfortably in place. There'll be some space underneath the op amp. And then let's solder it in. The video assumes you're kind of comfortable with soldering, but you know, there are lots of good guides on the internet, and I'll link those through. I would, so I use leaded solder for when I'm soldering for myself. You should be mindful of the hazards of leaded solder. It is easier to use than unleaded solder, but yeah, you should be aware of that. When I sell the assembled kits, I use unleaded solder. It's no problem to use unleaded solder, but you know, lead is considered a hazardous material if you eat it and stuff. So I basically would make sure you wash your hands afterwards. Okay, so it's fairly easy to get this in. If you are new to soldering, I would probably recommend the Punk Console, which is another kit I have on my shop as a first project. It's a little bit easier. There are fewer components, and because it's using like not this funny circular can op amp. I could make the pads a bit bigger, so it's really designed to make it easy to solder. But I've tried to make the pads on this as big as possible, so it's hopefully fairly easy to do. So once you've got that in, obviously cut the legs off. I always recommend these flat-sided wire cutters, and these are my favourite wire cutters. These are Hosan N34s. Let's just cut all the legs off. And if you're a competent solder, you don't need this guide. You'll know what you're doing. And in the documentation, there's a list of like which parts go where. So the order and everything is entirely up to you. There's no kind of checking stage. So next, I'm going to do these the ceramic disc capacitors. These are actually ordered by capacitance, right? So this is the 2.2 nanofarad. These are the 10 nanofarads, and this is the 100 nanofarad. It's slightly non-intuitive because the biggest one is not the biggest capacitance, but I tried to choose components that were all different sizes to make it easy to recognize where they would go on the board, basically. So it's particularly good for like if you haven't done a lot of soldering, it's not easy to get confused. So the 10 nanofarads is all marked on the board. So the 10 nanofarads go in here, the big ones, and then the 2.2, which is the smallest, goes in here. And it's up to you how many components you do at once as well. Some people prefer to do them one at a time, and some people prefer to do it all at once. It's entirely up to you. And I tend to bend the pins a little bit just to make sure that they kind of stay in. You can use something to do work holding. If I'm not doing a video like this, I would use like a vise, pan of vise, to hold boards in. Just means I don't have to awkwardly hold it with my fingers like this. And then, now my preference is to solder in kind of one leg at a time. And then I'll maybe just make sure it's properly pushed through, so I may push it through from the other side a little bit. Because I like to have them so they're not flapping around too much. Doesn't really matter how far they're pushed through, really. It's just an aesthetic. But like as I'm soldering it, I like just to make sure it's held in. And just get that all the way nicely in. Oops, don't want to do that. So once I've done one leg and it looks like it's in the right orientation on the other side of the board, I'll just finish up the other leg. It's always slightly awkward doing it under the camera, but that's fine. Then let's do this one. And you don't want a big blob of solder on the pads, obviously. You want it to be a nice, it should be, you know, like a little peak, but it shouldn't bow out basically. So you're looking at kind of a shape like this rather than bowing out. Okay, so all the guides I have and the documentation will also kind of discusses that a bit, but is that okay? Yeah, I think so. Let's just get all those off. Right, next I tend to do the resistor, so I just bend it down and form it into shape and then push it through where it says 10, oops, 10M. Should clean your tip every so often just to get any of the gunk off it. I use, rather than the sponge now, I use a wire wool kind of cleaner. I just find it's easier. I don't have to wet a sponge. But you'll get little bits of flux and stuff attaching itself to the tip. So it's good to clean that off. Okay, that's the resistor. Now we need to put in the transistors, and when I ordered them, when I put them on the kit, I put the BC547s at the top and the BC557s at the bottom. They are marked, but you know, it's also just as a double check, that's how they are. They're the 547s at the top and the 557s at the bottom, and they're also marked on the board where they should go. Let's just point them out. So the 547 is here and here, so kind of opposite corners to each other, and the 557s are here. So I like to do the 547s first. The transistors are kind of flat, and you'll need to bend out the pin, so it's kind of like that, so you can get it in the hole. And there's a flat side of the transistor, which you'll need to align to the flat marking on the board. Oops. So they go in just like that. Then just this, solder these in. And again, I like to do one pin. Oops. Just get one pin kind of in. Make sure it's properly pushed down and orientated. Do the same thing here. One pin in. Which one was that? It's that one. Yep. Okay, and then let's just finish those off. Cut them down. It's kind of easy. Oh, I've forgotten a pin. I have to do that. It's kind of easier to do these two at a time, because otherwise all the legs get in the way as you're doing the soldering. So it's kind of nicer just to do a few components and then do a few more, so you don't have all the legs sticking up and you can't get the soldering iron in. So these are the 557s just going into the opposite corners. just like to check everything is kind of lined up. Obviously on this all the like the components are exposed, so you have aesthetic considerations rather than just functional. So you make sure it all looks pretty, or you know, not pretty if you like as well. Depends on your tastes. Okay, that's almost everything. So the last component is the transistor. This is a little bit confusing, I guess, or just you have to make sure you get it right. The minus is going towards the board, so a little white marking with a dash here is going towards the op amp, and it just sits in there like that. And we solder it in again. That's it, there we go. So those are all the components. Now we've just got to get like the speaker and the battery connector on. So you can, when you're doing the cables, you can kind of wrap them up so they look neater. But for this video, I'm not going to, and it's just optional. It's just makes it look pretty. So the battery goes in onto the pins marked battery. The black to the one marked with a minus, and the red to the one marked with a plus. And I just tend to just push them over, stick the cables through, push them over, and then just apply the solder. Come on, there we go. That's a little bit too much solder, but it'll be fine. There's the other one done. And then the speaker cables, the same. So red to plus. To minus. Okay, so now it's just the speaker itself that needs to go on. So the speakers are covered with these little black blob stuff over the contacts. So you have to. So what I like to do is add a little bit of solder just to make it easier to get everything annealing. It fluxes it up. So if you just push into that black stuff, the pads will melt, and then you can apply a bit more solder just to make it nice and shiny. It's good to clean your tip because it's getting all mucky from this black stuff. But yeah, but you just want it to be kind of shiny. And then we can solder it in. So the red should go to the right. It's not critical. But if you just melt the solder on the pad and then push the connector into it, and then you want to make sure everything's got nice and hot, and the solder is all flowed all around the cable properly. And then the same for the red. make sure it's annealed to all the cable. Just leave it there for a little while to make sure everything gets up to temperature. Okay. Right. So now we test it. So this is kind of the moment of truth. Stick a 9-volt battery on, see if it works. And there we go. And that is what it should sound like. So once it's all working, you can stick everything together. And it's kind of up to you where you stick the battery and where you stick the speaker. I tend to just stick them on top of each other. Batteries last quite a long time, but you'll obviously need to remove the sticky pads and replace them if you stick it together like this. But that's how I do it anyway. So there we go, completed kit. If you feel that looks a bit too complicated for you, check out the Punk console, which is this chap. It's a much simpler design, so bear that in mind. Yeah, and like I say, I have other kits on the shop if you're interested. So if you do buy it and you build it, please let me know what you think and how you found the build process. I'm always interested in hearing your thoughts, but hopefully that video is helpful, and thanks very much.